Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar of the day. This is the 2020 Virtual Leadership Summit, something we've never done before. We would, of course, love to have had all of you here in Dallas, Texas with us, but instead we are doing it live where you can all sit in the comfort of your homes, your offices, wherever you may be, and we're excited about the content we're going to bring you today. So, first of all, I just want to talk through a couple of things before I bring up our presenter. One thing, just want to make sure everyone is aware of, is we have opening up, starting this Monday, the Prospanica Foundation Scholarship. This is going to be going live. You can go to the website, prospanica.org/scholarships. I want to give you a few details about this. First of all, we're doing it just a little bit differently this year. We're going to have a shortened window of application time. So instead of it being a 2-month application process, we're only going to have it open for about 4 weeks. It's a shorter application, though, so it's a little bit simpler. And people will be invited to go to the second round of applications. So it's a faster application. It's easier to do. This is for graduate students at the School of Business, as well as undergrads who are juniors and seniors pursuing degrees in their university's College of Business. You see the URL there. Check it out. It is for members only. So if you or someone you know is not a member yet, we will be running a discount starting Monday where student membership is 50% off. The code is already online. You can use it starting Monday. So we're excited about that. Another thing we have running right now is the Prospanica Board Leadership Program. And we're very excited not just to talk about this, but we have today in this afternoon webinar, one of the lead designers of the program, David Morelli, is going to be presenting. So I don't want to talk too much about the program because we have reserved a little bit of time in his presentation for him to talk about it. I just want to point out one thing. Right there is the website, prospanica.org/board leadership. This is where you can go to learn more about the program, where you can go to apply. We do accept applications on a rolling basis, which means applications are coming in right now. We have already said yes to a few people, so spots are filling up. You don't want to miss out on your opportunity to join this program. You'll hear more about it later in this webinar from David. Some other things that we have going on we want to make sure that everyone's aware of before we launch into the program. The virtual career fair. This is one of the coolest things we're doing right now. We are very excited to be offering this experience to you. This will be taking place April 28th from 12 to 3 in the afternoon. That's Eastern time. You can go learn more about it. There's the website right there. I made a bit.ly because the website itself is a little bit long, but you can go to that website, bit.ly/pro-career-fair, and learn more about it. It's going to be an amazing experience. And I do want to pause right now and make sure that everyone's clear. We still plan to have our 2020 Prospanica Conference and Career Expo in Las Vegas, October 14th through 16th. But we, in the meantime, have this experience you can take part in virtually, a great chance to meet some companies, talk to people, learn what they're offering, and you can either be doing it and looking for a career, a new job, a new start, or even consider it just practice getting ready for the Career Expo. So our very first virtual career fair coming up later in April. And then, of course, something else we want to make sure that we are talking about, Prospanica gear. This is our latest shirt, Generación Líder. It's so new, actually, you can't even buy it online yet. But it's going to be there very soon. We promise we will let you know as soon as this shirt is available. You can also order any of the other shirts. I mentioned our scholarship program. Remember that your proceeds from these purchases fund that program. So go to the store, buy some gear. If you want to get the newest shirt, we'll make sure that we let you know when that shirt is available. And something else we have coming up that we've got more we want to tell you about. We can't possibly squeeze it all into this webinar. So join us again virtually in Facebook. Step 1, follow us on Facebook. Step 2, next Thursday, March 19th at 2 p.m. Central, we're going to go live. We're going to tell you some exciting new things. So you don't want to miss this announcement, this chance to connect with us all. And we will see you all on Facebook next Thursday. And finally, as the slides progress, yes, I couldn't remember what was next. So don't forget, even though we aren't in the same space, even though we're not all here seeing the same thing in the same room, we still want to take this conversation we're having here together and share it out into the world. So make sure that any brilliant ideas you hear, which I know you're going to, you go ahead and tweet those, post them on LinkedIn, post them on Facebook. Use the hashtag Prospanica Summit. Even though it's a virtual, we still have the summit. We're still bringing this great content to you. And of course, we want to make sure we say thank you. We want to thank all of our sponsors, all of our partners. We especially want to thank our partner 3M and American Family Insurance. These are two sponsors who have supported this program to make sure they can bring it to you. We also want to make sure that we're acknowledging, which we did the morning webinar, the University of Dallas, which is bringing these two sessions to you so that you can earn the Certificate of Leadership Communication. So that is something else we want to acknowledge. And of course, we have David Morelli here, who is from the University of Denver, which is another close partner of ours. So thank you to our sponsors, thank you to our partners. And now, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and welcome David Morelli.
It's great to be here with you.
Coming up, there he is.
Yeah, excited. Yeah,
hey,
absolutely.
David, it's great to see you. So a couple of things I want to tell you about David Morelli. David is a professor at the Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver. He's had a really fascinating career. He is a wonderful leader, a wonderful coach. I had the benefit of working with David both in designing the board leadership program that we designed with the Daniels College of Business, and then also being a member of its first cohort. And so I've been able to work with David. I've been able to learn from David. And I am always thrilled when I get to say hello, when I get to hear what he has to say. I know he's going to be amazing. So, David, without further ado, I'm going to let you take control. Thank you for everyone for being here. And we, just one other piece of housekeeping. If you have questions, there's a question feature in the gray tab for the go-to bar. You can go ahead and type questions in there. Let us know when you have those, and we will, from time to time, take those questions and send them to David so that you guys can talk with him and find out what you want to have spoken about from your personal questions. So, David, it's all you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. And let me just say, it is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I wish that we were all standing together, sort of in one room, but I know all of us are very conscientious of our health, and thank you, Evan and team, for making a tough decision to have us all be able to be virtual, but think about the flexibility that we all get as a result of it. So, thanks for all the work that you do behind the scenes to make this happen. So I'm excited to be here and to be working with you today. And how I think about this is I want to dive into as much detail as possible to help you be the leader that you want to be. And to do that, one of the ways that I found really useful is to understand what happens in the brain. And when we understand what happens in all of our brains and how we are unique, each individual is unique, as well as each team is unique and each leader is unique. If you can understand that lens, then it empowers you to become even more powerful in the world. And working with Prospanica has been one of the most fulfilling and most empowering and powerful experiences that I've gotten the opportunity to have as a teacher, as a professor, as I've been in this field, the field of executive coaching and leadership for over 20 years, and this is like one of my favorite things to do. And so thanks for inviting me into this space, and hopefully that we can learn from each other. So what I'd love to hear, by the way, is also questions. So I saw Gloria say that she's excited to be here. I can see some of those questions, but I'm going to be tracking mostly the content, and then Evan will be piping in or sharing some of those questions, and we might even open up the line so that you can share it, because we'd love to hear from you. So as odd as it is to say this, I'd love for it to be as interactive as possible, because it's out of the richness of the questions that you have and us wrestling with these concepts that it becomes even more applicable. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So because I want you to have a little bit of my lens, I know I mentioned it a little bit, I wanted to just to let you know, hey, here's the perspective that I'm coming from, so that's hopefully useful to you. So for over 20 years, I've been in the field of executive coaching. I've been behind the scenes with executives as they make decisions about who to promote, who to hire, how to run teams effectively, and I've guided them in those decisions as well as to empowering their teams, et cetera. And what I've found is that there is, as many of you know, right, there's an imbalance in the world. And as I thought about, all of us have an opportunity to step forward and to serve in some greater way in the world. And but it's not necessarily set up to be fair. And what the reason that I'm here and that I'm passionate about working with Prospanica, as well as some of the other work that I do, is because each person has gifts innate within them. And if you can help those gifts come out into the world, regardless of ethnicity, gender, background, history, whatever it is, disabilities. My father has Parkinson's disease, which has put a strain on our family in a different way. So regardless of whatever the landscape is, each person's gifts coming out is absolutely critical to us having the sort of richness and world that we all need. And so I'm hoping that today, even though I'm a middle-aged white guy, that we can help to balance out. And that's some of why we're, later on I'll talk about the board leadership program, but helping to support leaders regardless of where they come from to really step into their true selves. That's been my passion for over 20 years in working with organizations and individuals. I happen to also have a podcast, and the podcast has 1.2 million subscribers, which is kind of fun. And we ultimately, all we talk about is personal and professional development, and I interview best-selling authors and CEOs of various corporations and academics and movie stars and Olympians and all kinds of people in order to pull out a formula for success. And so that's the lens that I come through is how can I take whatever information that we're talking about and put it in your hands so that you can live a more powerful life. Another thing that in my background, I worked for an organization called Pay Simple. I was the SVP, the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Talent Development, which basically says within organizations, you have to have people and strategy come together. You can't execute on anything that doesn't bring sort of the union of what's our strategy and what are our assets, particularly as it relates to people's gifts and how do you bring those gifts out and develop them. So at that organization, when I first started, I was coaching the CEO who had coached for many years, said, let's try an experiment. Let's get in there and have you come and coach the entire organization. Like at the time, it was 60 employees. And so we introduced coaching and some of the principles that we're going to be talking about today as it relates to the brain and leadership. We introduced that to the organization. And in the span of 5 years, they were worth about $35 million. And now today, 5 years later, they're worth about $2 billion. So a huge increase in growth. And I've gotten the benefit of seeing the changing landscape as we've grown as I've supported the organization growing. And so I'll draw maybe from some of those examples as we're talking about here today. I took my executive MBA at the University of Denver. I went in as following that, I went in as the executive director for executive education and then transitioned into a full-time faculty role. So part of my role there was designing the board leadership program, and in our partnership, Evan's like, hey, do you want to come and present some of the content that you're also passionate about around leadership? And I was like, absolutely, I would love to come. And so that's how I came here today. And again, I'm imagining us all in one giant conference room sitting together. And so the University of Denver is part of that. And then I have Org Coach, which is I do executive coaching, and that's sort of the brand where I train coaches and then also coach. So one thing that you might not know about me, I love to do this, and I love if you're willing to share some of the things about you in the question box, that would be great, just so I can sort of get a sense for everyone who's here. One thing, and I usually start off introductions this way, one thing you might not know about me. One thing, I used to be a competitive salsa dancing guy. So I was on a competitive salsa dancing team, and so if we're again in person, I might do like a double spin for you up on stage. But that's something that I absolutely love. So again, love to hear some of the things that you're excited about or passionate about in the chat window as well. Great. So let's roll on to the neuroscience of leadership. And as you share, thanks, Vivian. Vivian just put her information in there. Oh, awesome. We have a Zumba fan. Yay. Great. So just keep those things going. I can only see parts of the questions, by the way. And either George or Jorge, it's Enwaken, the name of the podcast, ENWAKEN. Great. So let's dive in, and as those come in, I'll keep scrolling. So the neuroscience of leadership, what we're going to be looking at is the brain, and looking at how the brain processes information. And once we understand how the brain processes that information, then we can be a little bit more thoughtful about how we lead other people, how we interact with other people, realizing that people don't, and here's the thing that blows my mind. Most of us think, gosh, like when I ask somebody to do something and they don't do it, they're just being difficult. But actually, one of the things that I'm hoping that you take away from today is that we all have our brains set up a certain way. And it's not, when you ask people to do something, it's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't respect you. It's not that they don't value your perspective or value your idea. It's not that they weren't listening. It's that their brains aren't prepared to make instantaneous changes. So we're going to be going through that, not as a way of letting people off the hook, but rather as a way of having a little bit more compassion and empathy, and then understanding what we need to do in order to have people change habits, behaviors, etc. And so it looks like we have some salsa dancer, training specialist, people who are passionate about cooking and gardening, somebody else who's also a DU alum, yay, and great, awesome. Thanks, Sandra. So let's go ahead and dive in, and we'll continue. So what I'd love to do, again, I'm just going to track the questions and answers. If you would, if you've heard this phrase, the brain is a computer, go ahead and type yeah, yes, see, whatever you want to type into the chat. Go ahead and type that in. Have you heard this phrase, the brain is a computer? All right. Yeah, yes. So much. See, with a smiley face. Yeah. All right, great. So here's the thing. Here's what's so interesting. The brain is actually not like a computer. If you were to actually look inside of the brain, it looks more like this. It looks like an electrical storm, right? Because what happens is you have synapses, and I don't know if you can see me as well, but there's synapses, there are gaps. And just like a spark plug in a car, there are electrical impulses, electrical storms in the brain that have movement of not only light, but electricity and information, as well as chemicals. There are these like firestorms that happen inside of our brains, and they're not like computers. We'll use an analogy to actually show how it's almost the reverse of the traditional computer that we think about. That's almost reversed, but we'll set that aside to say that the brain is actually much more mysterious than we give it credit for. And so what I'd like to do is start off with how is it that the brain is a little more mysterious than we might think. Here is what the brain, if you were to say all of the different connections in the brain has a lot of threads, right? It almost looks like, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, right? But like jellyfish, right? Like with the tentacles and things like that. There's a lot of light that passes through the brain, through those the neural connections, as well as then the nervous system. And also, if you were to say, well, how much power exists in this brain tissue? I used to play beach volleyball. I played semi-pro beach volleyball right around the age of 20. At that time, if you would have said this to me, it would have blown my mind, right? So picture a grain of sand. Picture, if you would hold up a finger just like I am, and it might look like I'm putting my finger up my nose, but I'm not. So put out your finger like this. Imagine the size of a grain of sand sitting on your finger. If you had that much brain tissue, size of a grain of a single grain of sand, you would hold on your finger 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synapses. 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synapses, and they're all talking to one another. You might say, well, that's weird, right? Or that's interesting. But if you think about it for a second, right? 100,000 neurons, how many grains of sand could fit in your head? Some of you are like, well, wait, are you saying like my head is full of sand? No, but think about how much of that tissue, right? And I realize I dropped a little piece of neuron. So you can put your finger down if you want to, or you can say, wow, and poof, and throw it in the air, whatever you want to do. But if you think about how much neural tissue is inside of your head, how much potential you have for all of this complex all of these complex firestorms, right? And connections, those synaptic connections between the different neurons that you have. There is an incredible amount of potential that you have to not only think, but to change the way you think. There's something called neuroplasticity, which you might be aware of. And it basically says that our brains have the ability to change the patterns, the ways that we've thought in the past. And so you have an incredible amount of potential inside of you. And it's not just like a computer, much more mysterious and powerful. And so one of the people that's arguably one of the smartest people who's ever lived, right? Albert Einstein. And we might know him from his E equals mc squared equation, right? It's basically saying that energy equals mass, right? If you think about the mass of maybe the chair that you're sitting on, or the table that you have, or whatever, the mass of whatever that is, the energy equals the mass times the speed of light, which is the c, squared. Mass times the speed of light squared. What does that mean? There's an incredible amount of energy packed up in all of this stuff. Here's a person who came up with an incredible way of understanding the universe and yet making it very simple. So how did Albert Einstein's brain work? How did his brain work? How is it that this person came up with this incredibly simple way of understanding a complex universe? Well, when Albert Einstein died, the person who was doing was basically the coroner, right? The one who was doing the dissection of Albert Einstein's body and all of that to basically see, well, why did he die, right? And this person was given the instruction to destroy everything. But when the coroner got to the brain, he's like, and apologies for the graphic image, but like just open it up and here's Albert Einstein's brain, arguably one of the smartest people who's ever lived. What are we gonna do, right? Am I gonna throw away? Am I gonna destroy Albert Einstein's brain? What do you think happened? And I realized that it would take maybe a little bit longer than anticipated to type all that in, so I'll share it with you, right? What happened was that the person who is doing, right, the coronary exam, or the work with him afterwards, right, who was basically dissecting Albert Einstein's brain, said, I can't destroy this thing, right? And basically imagine, right, grabbing it as a football and then sticking it in the back of your car. Yes, a hatchback, sticking it in the back of your car and making off with Albert Einstein's brain. Literally, the guy went across the country, hid in different like small cabins out in the middle of the woods, and he hid from everyone and started cutting up little pieces of Albert Einstein's brain and shipping it off to labs all around the world to find out why Albert Einstein's brain may have been a little bit different than ours. And so what the lab started doing was discovering not that Albert Einstein had different parts of the brain than we have, not that it was bigger, right, or more, quote, powerful, right? What they found is that Albert Einstein didn't have more neurons than us. And by us, I'll say the average person, right? Didn't have necessarily different parts or more neurons. What Albert Einstein had more of was more connections between the different parts of the brain, between neurons. So again, if we step back for a second and say, what does this mean? What does this tell us? How often have we thought, I've got to be the smartest person in the room? How often have we said, right, that, oh, if I were only as smart as that person? It likens, to me, an analogy is a little bit like what happened with computing, right? We're all watching, right? We're all watching and interacting with this platform because of the shift in mentality. So here's what happened. It used to be that people would say that a mainframe computer, right? Like, let's build a supercomputer, right? Let's build this giant computer. Let's have it take up a whole room, right? IBM, right? The mainframe. What happened was at a certain point, we've all probably heard of big data, right? Big data, the capacity to compute at super levels, right? So big data. So they didn't find, so a supercomputer, a mainframe computer wasn't necessarily the answer. What was the answer, which relates to this, is that people who created, there was an organization called Hadoop. What they figured out is that in order to create supercomputing power, what you actually need is average computers. Ones that you buy right off the shelf. So say you went to Best Buy or say you ordered it online or whatever. They literally went to a store, bought average computers that were for like regular consumers, and they stitched them all together in such a way that created more connections between these average computers. Why does this matter? How does it have something to do with Albert Einstein? Albert Einstein's brain wasn't a supercomputer. It wasn't that he had to be the, quote, smartest person in the room, although arguably we could say that he was. What he talked about and what happened in his brain was that he didn't take super ideas. He took average ideas and stitched them together. We as people, and I'll give you an example here in a second, but we as people don't need huge ideas. What we need is to take the things that we know about and network those ideas together in such a way that creates super computing power, super intelligence for each of us. We have all the neurons we need. We just need to build better connections between them. So here's an example. Albert Einstein was big in thought experiments. So he's like, right? And he probably closed his eyes. I'm going to close my eyes for a second, just imagining being Albert Einstein for a sec. So, right? If I were, right? He talked about the speed of light squared equals mc squared. C is the speed of light. If I were at the front edge of, right? If I were riding along on a beam of light, what would the world look like to me? And so he just imagined himself riding along a beam of light. He used to be really big into trains. He would ride the train a lot in what he was doing. And so some of the Doppler effect that we know is when we hear like something's like, right? Like you've probably heard that, right? Sound travels that way because I won't go too far into it, but he realized that on the train, he's like, oh, that's what that effect is the faster something is moving towards you, its waves go faster. And then when it goes away, it's got that relativity, that relative movement behind us. And so that's why it sounds like it's getting longer. The sound is the same on the train, but it gets compressed or amplified depending on where he had the same kind of mentality. He was riding a beam of light. What would the world look like from here? Because he just took the average idea of I'm riding on a train, and what does the world look like from here? And that's what he talked about, is he just took this regular idea and he just thought about it from a different perspective. If we as people take the things that we already know and think about different problems that we face from the perspective of how we already know how to solve problems, we network together ideas in order to solve the most challenging things in our lives. And around leadership, we have to realize that we have what it takes to understand people because we are people, right? Like, we understand certain things about ourselves. And if we understand certain things about ourselves, we can understand certain things about each other. And so each neuron, and this sort of builds into what we were talking about before, and I'll get into how each person's brain is unique. But for now, each person's brain, each neuron has the potential of making up to 10,000 connections between each neuron. I'm going to rewind for a second, right? So each neuron, one single neuron, put out your finger again if you would. I know it's a little bit silly and I can't see you, and that's okay, and I won't know if you're not doing it, but holding up your finger, right? Just for the sake of emphasis, that single grain of sand, can you remember how many neurons were in that single grain of sand worth of neural tissue? 100,000 neurons, right? 100,000 neurons in a single grain of sand. Click, click forward. 10,000 potential connections for each neuron. I'm not going to ask you to do the math, but if I did ask you to do the math, how many would it be? The real answer is like a lot, right? There's a lot of potential connections that each neuron can make. And how many grains of sand are inside of your head, right? The math gets mind-boggling, but yet the implications are even more so. You have Einstein's brain. You have the potential within you to take the things that you already know and to weave them together. Good average ideas stitched together make super ideas, super computing power within each of our brains. And so the brain is much more mysterious and powerful than we give it credit for. And I realized that a lot of this is, it's like, oh, right? It's like, it's a lot of information. And what does it mean? So let's go into what it means. I mentioned that I would bring back an analogy about a computer, but we'd actually reverse it. So I'll rewind for a moment. If you're just looking at the computer, you might be using a computer, you might be using a phone, you might be using some other device, right? But if you think about it, put into the chat, whoops, I think there we go. Put into the chat in your computer or device or whatever. Thank you, somebody said autopsy. Yes, that's what I was going for, autopsy, thank you. So that was about Einstein's brain. So if you would put into the chat, if on your computer, what do you believe is more limiting, right? Is it the hardware of the computer or the software of your computer? Meaning, if I were to try to run a 500 terabyte, program of software, is the limiter is it going to break down because the hardware or because of the software, right? Where is the limit, if you will? Go ahead and put that into the chat. So we've got some softwares, we've got some hardwares, right? Not enough ports, says Colleen. Thank you for that, Colleen, right? Hardware, right? So if you think about it, right, what's going to be the limitation? It's easier, let's say, to modify the software than it is the hardware. The limit of what you can run on your computer is the capacity in often the hardware, right? Like, oh, we don't have enough RAM. I don't have enough, right? All the stuff, right? Like, I don't have enough memory. I don't have enough whatever. So if you think about it, much of the limitation is on the hardware side for a computer. And if you think, well, like, which dictates the other? Well, the hardware tends to dictate what software you can run. But in the brain, here's the mysterious thing. It's actually that the brain's software
Hey, David, this is Evan at Prospanica. We may have lost your audio.
Let me see. Let me
Hey,
just
everyone.
see if the audio
I think you're back,
is the
David.
audio back. Okay, great. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
I think we have.
Uh,
Not a problem.
so where did it end off? Just so I can pick it up.
We're not. I'm not sure. We started seeing
Okay,
messages
all
come
right.
through,
Well,
and
just yeah.
trying to troubleshoot.
Perfect. Let's dive in. Right. So the software doesn't necessarily build new hardware on your computer. Is that fair to say? Right? Like the software isn't running around saying, hey, let's create new hardware on your computer, but it does that actually in the brain. Here's what I mean. If you have ever tried, if you would put in the chat, if you have ever tried to set a New Year's resolution or something like it, a new goal, and you weren't able to make it, right? Like you didn't keep your New Year's resolution or you didn't do a goal, write in yes if you have had that, or C if you've had that, right? Go ahead and put that into the chat window if you've ever had that experience, right? That you didn't keep a New Year's resolution. Got a bunch of yeses every year, says Vivian. Thank you, Vivian. I love it, right? So yes, of course, that happens to all of us. If we were in the room, you'd see everyone's hand up, right? That sometimes for whatever reason, we can't get that goal to happen. Why? Well, it's because we don't have the hardware, the hard wiring that we need for that new habit or behavior. Think about all the habits that you do have, right? All those habits almost become automatic because what the brain will do is it will create, the more that you use a certain pattern, it will create the cognitive superhighways that you need in order to support that desire. When you say on New Year's Day or the day before, I am going to eat better, right? I am going to show up at the gym every day. It's a new thought. And you don't have the easy wiring in place yet. But if you hold that thought over time long enough, what will happen is that the brain will start to build the hardware to develop it. Think about, and I realize that some of you might be going, I don't get it. Let's keep going here for a second. What happens in the brain, I'll use an analogy. Imagine that you were driving from one place that has never had a car travel to it to another place that's never had a car travel to it, right? Imagine you were driving across a field between 2 points, right? Is the traveling going to be bumpy or smooth? If you would, just put that in the chat. Bumpy or smooth, the first time that you ever drive over this field, right? Arguably, in most situations, some of you are thinking about edge cases, right? Many of you are like, bumpy, bumpy, bumpy. Thank you, Drew, right? Thank you, Gloria. Yeah, bumpy. But what happens is if you were to continue to go back and forth between those 2 points, things would start to even out a little bit, right? Like you'd have a more well-worn path, that things would get a little smoother the more you use it, right? And then if you live in a certain, town or city or whatever, if other people start using it, right, they're probably going to say, well, let's take a grader, right, and grade the road. Let's smooth out this road in order to make it to be a smoother journey, right? The more you use it, the more people are going to say, oh, let's make this a smoother thing. The more, if you use it even more, right? What will happen is the city or county or whomever will come around and will say, great, let's pave the road, right? And so you'll put down pavement. But then let's say that not only are you paving the road, but people are using this all the time. Well, what's going to happen is it's going to turn into a highway, right? The people are, the city or whoever's in charge of the infrastructure is going to widen the road, right? In order to make the traveling much more smooth, you get back and forth a lot quicker, right? It'll be a lot easier of a journey. In some ways, like many of us, when we drive, let's say to work and back, although you might not be driving to work and back now, but if you drive from work and back, right? It's almost like sometimes you can just check out and you're not even aware of the every turn that you made on the way home. And it's kind of like you just showed up at home. What does this have to do with the brain? Our brains are like the county or city, right? We will put down new neural tissue the more that something gets use. We'll build these neural pathways or cognitive superhighways if they get used. The trouble is, on New Year's Day, we decide that this is the day that we want to start exercising. And so what we end up doing is we get in our car and we start driving across the field. And it's very bumpy. And maybe we can do it for 3 days in a row, but then we forget. We don't even get in the car, right? We forget that we even had that goal. We fall off and say, you know what, today I don't want to be jostled around. Today I don't feel like going, right? And so you haven't had time to build the cognitive superhighway that you need. And here's what happens. There's a phrase that says it takes 21 days to form a habit. Have any of you heard that? Type in the chat if you've heard, and thank you, Jorge or George. Yes, the first time is bumpy, right? So type in the chat if you've ever, yep, some of you are like, wait, what? If you've had the experience where you've heard that it takes 21 days to form a habit, right? This phrase, it takes 21 days, is basically saying if you want to start something new in your life, you have to do it consistently. Well, there was research that was done, and by the way, this is true if you don't have a competing habit in place. Here's what I mean by a competing habit. A competing habit is something where you have, you're trying to counteract something else. So let's say that every time you feel stress in your life, like, you know, there's something with your job, or there's something around, you know, money, or there's something around a relationship or whatever, that your coping mechanism is to go right to the refrigerator and to grab some, you know, ice cream, or grab like something, right? Grab whatever it is, chocolate pudding or whatever your thing is. So let's say you have a habit of emotionally eating. Well, if your goal is to eat better, what happens in the brain is that you're arguably that you have competing wiring. If really your diet was fine and you just wanted to clean it up just a little bit, right? You might not have as much competing wiring for eating well, but you might if you have the emotional eating pattern. Here's the little bit of scary stuff that happens in all of our brains. Our brains, they process decision-making information up to 10 seconds before ever making us aware that we are unconsciously making that decision. What does that mean? It means that in neurological time, there are practical months that go by, months of planning ahead, where your unconscious habits start firing in your brain before ever making you aware that you're about to choose the pudding or the ice cream. And so you do it without even knowing it. And so you didn't even get a chance to eat better, right? Because your brain was already firing ahead of ever making you aware that you were making the decision to go for the ice cream. You do it unconsciously. So this is not a hopeless case, but it's saying that if you have competing wiring, it takes longer. And so if you imagine how many years have you been seeing the world upright? How many years have you been seeing the world upright, where the floor is down and the ceiling is up? Some of you are going to be like, what? Like forever, right? Thank you, Gloria. Forever, right? You've been seeing it this way forever. So in the military, I guess you can experiment on people who are in the military. So what they did was they gave people in the military these glasses that turned the world upside down, right? They flipped the world where now the floor was where the ceiling should be, and the ceiling was where the floor should be. And they did this experiment at having people wander around. And what they found is that people's brains, with this competing wiring of how the world should be, right? And you imagine like day 20, right? Day 15, they're wandering around. They're like, I'm totally discombobulated, right? The world is upside down. Day 20, the world is upside down. Day 21, the world is still upside down. And it wasn't until day 40 that the brains of these people switched. And so now they saw the world righted again, right? They saw the floor underneath their feet and they saw the ceiling above their heads. Their brains literally flipped how they saw the world in 40 days. What happened was that if they took the glasses off even once during that 40-day period, they started over again at day 1. So to change or transform something in your life, when you have competing wiring that has the same sort of triggers, it takes longer. Again, I'm not saying this because it's hopeless. I'm saying this because this is already what exists. And if we don't understand this, then we say, why the hell am I so stupid, right? Why have I not been able to accomplish this thing? Why is it, right, that this keeps going wrong or that keeps going on? Well, you might have competing wiring. And oh, by the way, if it's an emotional pattern that you've had in the brain, it doesn't even make it to rational thought, which is why sometimes we say stupid things, right? Or we have a tone, right? You know the tone, right? Like somebody says, why are you angry? And you're like, oh, I'm not angry. You know, and you're like, huh, oh, really? Like, have you heard your tone? And the real answer is no. Because of the way the brain is set up, right? If I turn to the side for a second, the frontal lobes of the brain are the last to have developed, right? It's the youngest part of the brain. The oldest part of the brain is the limbic system of the brain, which is your emotional brain center. So all the wiring has to run through your emotional brain center before expressing out of you. So you have a rational thought, right? You want to say something like with curiosity, oh, why were you late? And what it comes out as is, why were you late, right? And then like, oh, you're upset. I'm not upset, right? We don't even know that we're upset because it doesn't come into the frontal parts of our brain. This has tremendous power in lots of ways. But before I leave this slide, I want to share with you, if you hold an intention over time, if you hold a desire strong enough over time and you set your brain up to succeed with this, your brain, that intention, that thought, that software will start to wire your brain to support your goals. It needs reinforcement, but the software, the idea of the brain will actually start building the cognitive superhighway inside of your head, right? To support what you're trying to do. It's fascinating that the software, the ideas that we have, the desires, the goals that we think up will actually build cognitive superhighways. Here's what's powerful about that for others. Oh, by the way, sorry about that. Our ability to then change our brains is incredibly important. So here's, many of you have probably heard the phrase, Darwin's phrase, survival of the fittest. Is that a fair statement? Have you all heard that phrase? Is that a fair assessment? Chat it in if you will. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, all of you. Great. So this is actually what Darwin said. It's not the strongest of a species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is the most adaptable to change. Many of us only heard the strongest survive, right? Survival of the fittest. Fittest didn't mean strongest, but we think that way, right? In our brains, we think, oh, fittest is strongest. Fittest is most intelligent. No, it's actually the most adaptable to a changing landscape. Many of you are in business. If you think about what's happening right now on a global scale, right, with coronavirus, et cetera, businesses that are able to adapt themselves to changing landscapes can take advantage of new opportunities that emerge. I have a friend who does public speaking. She's incredibly, like, she's been the public speaking, guide for U.S. presidents and for the fire chief at 9/11, in New York City. The New York City fire chief, as he's addressing the world. She was the media coach for him. She's an incredible person. And we were having a conversation yesterday, and she goes, wow, all of my travels and trips just got canceled. All of the engagements that I had just got canceled. And we were talking, and I said, well, hang on a second. Like, what's the potential opportunity here? And then we both realized, oh, right? We're all now doing either GoToMeeting or Zoom or any other number of platforms, right? We're all turning to an alternative way. And so our ability to understand how to be at a distance, to lead virtually, as well as how to maybe make sales virtually, how to be team members together, how to lead meetings at a distance. It's her same core content, just delivered in a different way. And so she's just been reaching out this morning to all of the people who are her clients and saying, by the way, here's a new way to think about presentation skills and your executive presence and your ability to sell at a distance. And we just got emails back where people were like, oh, thank you. We were just talking about how we were going to handle this challenging situation. So it's not the strongest that survives. It's the most adaptable to change. And so for you, are you willing to adapt to the changing landscape, right? So all of our brains need to be adaptable. And so what this means is, for people, not only does each person's brain need to be adaptable, but each person's brain is at a different starting point, right? We all have a different starting point as it relates to how we process fear, how we process different other types of emotions as well as how we think, what we believe it is to be a good team member, how we think we should show up at work, our beliefs about work, and fundamentally what work is about in our lives, right? So if you think about being a leader, you have to realize that just like our thumbprints, our brains are unique to us, how we have them not only wired, but also what thoughts are wired together. If you think about 100,000 neurons in a single piece of brain tissue the size of a grain of sand, with 10,000 potential connections from each neuron, right? And how many fits into our brains? What are all the combinations of the ways that we could wire, even just physically, those neurons together? Again, mind-boggling, right? Our brains are so unique. We all see the world differently. Why that matters is that it isn't, when you ask somebody to do something, even if it's, hey, instead of clicking button A, B, then C, click A, C, then B, right? And if they've been used to going A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, and you say, no, A, C, A, C, B, right? And they're like, A, C, B, A, C, B, A, B, C, A, B, C, right? And you come along and you go, what's wrong with you? You just clicked A, B, C. I told you it's A, C, B. They're going to say, oh, I didn't even realize that I didn't do that, right? And they're gonna feel bad, or you're gonna make them feel bad, right? And so accountability in leadership isn't about what most of us think it is. It's not about punishment. It's not. Accountability is actually just the process of following up with people. Because just like driving across a field, the more you use it, the smoother it gets. The more the neurons fire in a certain pattern, the more it becomes reinforced, the more it becomes automatic, right? The more it bleeds into that 10 seconds before ever making you aware of it. And so you can do over time, if you reinforce habits with people and you just follow up, not punish, but just follow up, they keep firing those neurons and go, oh yeah, that's right, I need to remember ACB, right? They go, oh yeah, okay. And then they're like ACB, 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 ACB. And then you come along and say, by the way, it's gonna be BAC, right? And then they're like, damn it, right? So here's the thing that we have to respect about people. Anytime that you ask people to change a behavior, right, a pattern, much less an attitude, you are literally, and I don't mean this with like, I don't want to back away from this, you are literally asking them to change their brains for you. Hey, by the way, would you rewire your brain for me? Can you imagine the audacity of somebody coming up and asking you to rewire your brain for them, for their whim, for their desire, for their, for their purpose, for their ask, whatever? You'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, get your hands off my brain. But every time we ask somebody to do something differently than they've done in the past, we are literally asking them to rewire their brains for us. You're asking them to rewire their brain for you. And if they have competing wiring, it will be hard for them. They will need follow-up. They will need that attention and maybe compassion for when they fail, just like you, when you failed to a New Year's resolution, whether it was exercise or eating differently or whatever, right? Maybe you wanted to juggle every day, I don't know, right? Whatever it is you were wanting to do, if you fell off, it's not because you aren't intelligent, and it's not because that you didn't want to, and it's not because it wasn't sincere and you weren't willing and all that. It was because you didn't have the wiring to support the new desire. You needed cognitive, if you will, support. And so little reminders, as silly as they sound, like a little Post-it note on a computer screen, will take a moment where you're conscious of what you're wanting, and will have you fire that sequence again, right? It's like, oh, I just took a mental trip. Got it, right? I just traveled over that bumpy road. Oh, I realize now that all I need is follow up. So that in moments when I'm unconscious and I'm forgetting, that I become more conscious. And so whether that's that you need to take a breath more often when you're angry, right? You have a Post-it note. Don't hope that every time you're angry, you'll remember, oh yeah, right? That you'll go into your frontal lobes, right? Oh yeah, I should take a breath here. No, you're gonna have that reinforced over time. You're going to have that, like that thought have to come back over and over again. So just out of curiosity, right, is this making sense? If you would, go ahead and type in if this is making sense, if you understand sort of where we're at. Great, excellent, great. And please ask questions if this doesn't make sense, and we'll have a little bit of time for questions here as well. So I'm gonna continue on, and I'm happy to rewind if you have questions. So please put those in the chat again. Great. So it's no surprise that the world is changing. We're all feeling it, right? We are all experiencing sort of the volatility of the world, right? Especially, again, and like we've all had this change and disruption where we would have been in person, but now we're actually at a distance, and there's volatility in the world. Even with, you think about the financial markets, there's volatility in these for our lives, right? So it's fast, it's unpredictable, it's uncertain, right? These disruptive changes are happening, and we don't know what's going to be our future. And we can't rely on the past in order to predict what that future is. And it's complex. If you think about, here's this virus, right? The coronavirus that has disrupted so many things, including the supply chain from China, right? Not to mention the lives, right, in China. But it's disrupted. Okay, well, now we're not going to bring in any goods from China, and then the ships stop coming, and then well, but as we track it through, why isn't there toilet paper on our shelves? Well, where did the toilet paper come from? Or, you know what I mean? Like, everybody's hoarding toilet paper or whatever, like cleaning wipes or whatever. So like it's this whole complex thing. When how do you get it to unwind? And people are stopping traveling, and conferences are getting canceled, or in this case, reallocated online. Good choice, Prospanica, yay. So right, like all this complexity is happening, right? And there's ambiguity. We don't quite know what the right solution is. We don't know what to pull on necessarily. There's ambiguity about all that stuff. And so in the 1950s, the United States military came up with this phrase, VUCA, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and how it will continue to rise. And what they were noticing is that it's harder and harder to have this sort of chain of command that everybody knows exactly what to do. And because everything is changing so quickly, you can't modify changes often. And so what we think about in terms of our brains is that as we're faced with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, what do we tend to do? And the short answer is we tend to freak out, right? And when the brain is faced with fear, right, we lose 10 to 15 IQ points. Fear, uncertainty, doubt, terror. That makes us dumber. Well, what do we need when things are volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous? We need all of the brain power that we can. And so I would recommend for each of us to think about what has us be able to set aside the fear. And by the way, just on the some of you are like, well, is 10 to 15 points a lot, right? Here's a way of thinking about it. This is not an advertisement for it, even though I live in Colorado. I'm not really a user of this, but if you think about if you're high on pot, you only lose 5 IQ points. So you're 2 to 3 times as dumb when you're high, or sorry, when you're in fear, uncertainty, or doubt than whether you're high, right? So it's incredibly detrimental that when we face fear, uncertainty, and doubt, it's incredibly detrimental, especially when we need our best thoughts. And so your ability to process fear and to recenter yourself and to come into moments, and by the way, oxygenation is one way to bring down the fear response, right? Taking a walk, right? Starting to step away, labeling, I'm really afraid right now, right? And maybe going into the scenario, like I'm afraid I'm gonna lose my job, and I'm afraid I'm gonna lose my house, I'm afraid I'm gonna, I'm afraid that my parents are gonna contract, this disease and they're gonna die, right? The more that you can label something, especially around fear, the more you can label it, can oxygenate it, if you will, right? To step back, get a new perspective, right? Find something to be grateful for, to sort of balance out, right? Well, the more that we have those, the more we recover our best thoughts, and the more we're able to move creatively into our futures. And so I would say, don't let your brain hijack your intelligence, because the world will only get more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous over time, right? While we may be in a spike right now, right? If you think about the trajectory of life, it's only going to get more so, not less so. So better to have tools to be able to deal with it. So now I want to continue. What I'd like you to do is to say out loud. I know this is weird. Some of you are probably at work, and so you can mumble it or do whatever. But if you would, say what you see on the screen. Say it out loud. Ready? All right. So probably some of you are saying 9, right? Next. Say 10, right? 11. Great. Go ahead. I'll let you continue. Say this one. This one. Great. Usually what I do with groups is I have half the room close their eyes, and half of the room does what you just did. And the other half of the room does this next exercise, right? Say again, just like you did. Say what's on the screen, right? Great, so you're like F, right? E, right? Continue. Yep, yep. And here's where things get a little weird. When half of the room has their eyes shut and they are, quote, primed, as they call it in psychological research, if they're primed with numbers, they'll see this ambiguous symbol as 13. But if we're primed, if a room is primed with letters, people will call this B, right? And you may have done that too. You might go, wait. But which is it? Is it B or is it 13? And maybe because you saw the numbers first, you'd say, it's 13, right? Or maybe, right, if you only saw letters, which, all of us were primed first with numbers, but you might say, oh, this is a B, obviously. There's a little gap there, but, right? But what's the gap? We all, especially under fear, stress, pressure, or whatever, we take ambiguous information and we end up assigning whatever our first thought is. And our first thought, particularly when we're under fear or stress, isn't necessarily our best thought. Our reactions, our biases come into play when we're under fear, uncertainty, or stress. I'm gonna do, and so this leads me to a great Mark Twain quote. Mark Twain said, "It ain't what you know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And so here's how I think about it. Actually, before we get into here's how I think about it, we're gonna do another version of this very quickly. Just say what's on the screen, right? So you might say chicken, egg. We'll call this a car, right? So let's just go through it again. Ready? Say it out loud. Chicken, egg, car. Great. Chicken, egg, car, chicken, egg. What's next? Type it into the chat. What's next? Car, 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 car. And here's where we end up. So what we did was we collectively made a mistake, a cognitive mistake, which is, as we talked about, our history isn't a great predictor of the future. And when we use our history, our pattern making abilities, which are strong, when we use that to predict what's coming up in our future, we often end in the toilet, right? We think that the past is an accurate predictor of our future, and yet more so it's not. And so again, it's our way of, and some of you are like, I feel tricked, I want my money back, right? Or whatever, right? But this is the cognitive mistakes that we make. And so we want to make sure not to end up in the toilet. And so we can't necessarily say that the past is a good predictor of the future, especially now, right? And so here's what I find, right? That life is the cruelest teacher because it gives us the test first and the lesson later. And how many of us have ended up maybe even in that exact same painful situation, right? Where we have that experience. So what I want to do is, I know there's a bunch more slides. I was going to talk about the stress stuff. For those of you that are going to take the board leadership program, we'll go into more of this, but I'll give you the snapshot version now just for the sake of time. The brain has reward and stress response. Different parts of our brain fire that way. And so we perceive threats and rewards disproportionately. In fact, what we tend to do is we are wired to be more afraid than we are to want to go forward. And so our brain, our social brain, sorts for a lot of different things. And our pain response is actually registered in the same place as our social pain, and our physical pain responses are in the same place, except social pain has more memories associated with it. So I'm going to scoot forward a bit Again, those of you that are going to take the board leadership program, you're welcome to join me, and we'll go through in this in more detail. For the brain searches for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, meaning how connected do I feel, and fairness. And that you can take a decision and break it down to make sure that you're using you as a status position person, as a leader, that you're using your status well, you're giving people the certainty that you can, you're helping them build autonomy, that you're helping them feel connected to one another, and that the level playing field, or that the playing field is level, that there's fairness. Great. So I want to invite you to ask questions. I'm happy to stick around afterwards to answer some of these questions. If we aren't able to get to your questions, you may ping Prospanica as well. But I want to give an opportunity for questions. Some of you do have the question about the board leadership program. I'm just going to do that while you're typing in some of your questions. I'm just going to review some of that real quick. What we do in that program is that we start off with a 2-day immersion. We go through, and if this is interesting to you, great. And if it's not, you'll just say, oh, okay, well, here's maybe some topics that I would want to study on my own. But in the pursuit of greater leadership and potentially sitting on boards, which is incredibly important for balancing out how the world, how things are unbalanced right now. I know there's lots of statistics around the disproportionality, especially at the board level, for people of color, especially the Latinx community, that this is part of our desire to balance that out. So what we'll do, assuming that we can do it in June, is we'll come together and have a day immersion on leadership, diversity and inclusion, as well as an influence, how to influence from a rich perspective, as well as how change works. Also, people tend to need finance information, so budgeting, financing, social entrepreneurship. So coming to the University of Denver, I'll be there, I'll greet you on day 1. And then there are a series of webinars, which include things like executive presence, building more financial acumen, strategic thinking. There's modules on talent development, coaching and leadership, performance management, as well as selling your ideas. And we've added negotiation as well, deep levels of negotiation, how to negotiate, which is a little bit different than selling. And then at the conference in October in Las Vegas, we're going to get together and we'll do more of this type of information. We'll focus, actually this has changed slightly, so I apologize if this is an updated version. But we'll do speaking, your ability to present at higher and higher senior levels, as well as at the board type level. We'll go into various types of leadership as well as strategy. And then we'll look at your ability to operationalize or execute on your vision, as well as integrating your values. And all throughout the program, which I didn't mention, from the very beginning of the program to the end, you're going to set a goal. And each session will build a building block towards you getting to your goal, whether that's ultimate senior leadership or not. But you designing a roadmap, and then we talked about the cognitive superhighway, right? We're going to help you build in the structure and support that you need in order to not only get to a certain point at your goal. If it's like, hey, I want to sit on a Fortune 500 board, that might take longer than the 4 months that we have, but you'll also develop a plan that goes beyond the program. So we created a structure because we want to empower you in how you lead in the world. Because, as I mentioned at the very top, my passion and our passion is that you bring out your gifts. So if this is of interest to you, and by the way, here are some of our faculty members. It's a great faculty. They're tremendous. We did this last year. Great cohort that went through it. And so we've paired up if you want to know about that, about to answer questions. But if you want to know more about it, prospanica.org /board leadership. And you can also email programs about that. So I want to say, I'm going to answer questions, but I also want to say thank you so much. Not only for this time together, right? But for the work that you're doing in the world. I know that sometimes it's hard to pursue your goals, you face setbacks and challenges, but you carved out this time to become a better version of you, to understand not only your own brain, but how you can support and serve the brains and the lives around you. And I would say, if you take anything away from this, and hopefully you take a lot away, but if you take anything away, it's understanding that people, when they go into fear, they do dumb things. And if you want to help change the world, then you need to reinforce and continue reinforcing the things that you want, understanding it takes a long time to transform. And yet, if you just keep following up on things, we will and are changing how this world is, how it leads, and how it leaves us in our lives. And so thank you so much. I'm going to answer some of the questions now. So Evan, you're welcome to share them if you want to. Some people I know, if you have to check out, you have to check out, but I'll stick around as long as you like. And hopefully I'll get to see you in Denver. And if for whatever reason we need to shuffle it around, we can shuffle it around that board leadership program, but we're excited for that. And obviously—
Thank you, David. I was just gonna echo that. We are looking into our plans for the next 6 to 12 months, and we will be figuring out if there's any adjustments that we feel the need to make for the board leadership program. We'll definitely announce those. And of course, the beauty of the board leadership program is a good portion of it is already conducted virtually as it is. So anyone who's interested in applying, we encourage you to still do so. The program, we anticipate, will go forward without interruption. It may just have to go forward differently if necessary, but we will communicate that as we go.
Awesome. So there was— Gabrielle had a question. I may be mispronouncing that. I apologize. Does meditation help bring down fear? Absolutely, right? It's your ability to get present and centered. And part of it is that fear exists when we extend in either direction. And what I mean by that is, if we extend into the past, there's lots of things we could be afraid of our past, right? And our brains will take us there. Our brains can also project into the future, right? And as long as we entertain those thoughts, right, about, oh, what could the future be? We'll end up getting afraid. And so one of the gifts of meditation is to bring you into the present moment. Because if you were to pause long enough and look around, you'd realize that actually it's okay, right? Like right now, you're relatively safe. Right now, you have enough, heat or cool or whatever, right? Like right now, your needs are being met. And then the brain says, but what about the future? What if? And that's where the fear exists. The fear doesn't exist as much in the present moment. And it subsides when you realize, wait, what can I do from here? And so as you orient to what can I do from here, it will bring the fear down. It takes, there's research on this, that the fear response, especially a high visceral reaction of fear or anger, takes about 2 minutes to subside. And if any of you watch hockey, I'm not sure if you do, every time that there's a penalty, how long is the person in the penalty box? Answer, 2 minutes, right? So it takes usually 2 minutes to reset, depending on, right, if we just sort of get present and get out of the fear cycle. So great question. Are there any books that you can recommend is one of the questions. And I realize, Evan, I'm sorry, I don't want to steal your thunder, but it's okay if I just field these questions?
No, go ahead. That was actually a question I was going to raise if you didn't get to that one.
Great, okay. Are there any books that you would recommend on the subject for further study? Around neuroscience, there are lots of books, but I can't say that the main place that I go to is a place called the Neuro Leadership Institute. And that's where one of the models, the SCARF model that I was going to mention, that comes out of there. And so they do a bunch of research and share what happens in the brain and how does it affect our experience. So there are papers that you can get for free online or sign up for their membership or whatever. Great. So, and thank you, Vivian and Regina. And I'm just going to keep going down here to see if there's other stuff. Forced to rewire your brain for someone else. And I can't see the rest of that question. Oh, there it is. How can you find a solution to solve both sides' concerns, especially if you're struggling seeing eye to eye? That's a great question, especially around either negotiations or getting in sync with someone else. There's an author, Stephen Covey, who wrote a book a long time ago. This is when I first started getting into coaching. This book came out, which was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits that he talks about is seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? And what happens in conflict situations is each person will entrench into resistance. And what we always end up saying is like, well, you don't understand my perspective, right? Well, you don't understand my perspective, right? And so what's the goal? I mean, or the easiest solution is embedded right in the statements. Oh, great. Well, let me see your perspective. And then instead of just, oh, you're feeling this, but back to my perspective, you have to say, I imagine that if I were you, I'd be feeling ... right? I imagine that I feel like, man, like I'm stressed. I have all this stuff going on. You know, I feel like I'm a good performer. I'm making it up, right? So I imagine if I were you, I would have all of this and I wouldn't understand where this change was coming from. Is that fair? Is that a fair thing to say? And they might say, yeah, right? What you're looking for is a deep yes, an empathetic deep yes. And by empathetic, I mean you being empathetic, for them to say, yes, you get it, right? And then you can say, is there anything else? This is part of the, what we'll go into in the program too, but this is just a little snippet, is difficult conversations are usually about seeing their perspective first. And then once you see their perspective, they're much more willing to come and see your perspective, right? But they won't do it when neither side is willing to bridge the gap. So you have to be in some ways the bigger person and see their perspective. It doesn't mean you agree, it's just you can see, oh, if I were you, I'd be seeing the world this way. Is that right? If I had your brain, sort of what you're saying, I'd see, like, I'd be afraid about this thing and I wouldn't understand why it's happening and all of that. Once you can get them to say yes, you can then share your perspective. So great question. Love that question. And there are people saying, thanks for the webinar. Great. Yeah, I've loved it too. Thanks, Candice and Regina and Gloria. And okay, great. So in the context of improving team performance, I'm just going to stick around and answer a couple more. Evan, you can kick me off whenever you need to kick me off. But
no, people are still sticking around, so go for it.
Great. Okay. In the context of improving your team's performance, wouldn't there be a paradox? If we are wanting to change their behaviors for the better performance without having them, quote, change their brains. Here's the thing, right? People will change their brains voluntarily if they see the benefit or the extension or expression of their values in whatever the change ends up being. What I mean by that is if I ask you to change for me, you're much less likely to do it than if you, through our conversation, discover that this actually aligns with what you care about, right? And it sounds a little bit manipulative, but how I think about it, or how I think about it is, if this change is going to happen anyways, and it's going to serve them ultimately, it's going to serve all of us, then it's my duty to reduce resistance to them, because if they don't change with a little bit more ease, they're going to suffer, right? We're going to have hard conversations. They're going to feel like they're not doing their best. They might not get as many rewards, you know, all that stuff. So if we talk about it, I'd say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts about that? And then they give their input. It's called a consultative approach, right? What do you think about this? What, you know, if we were to do it, like how like how might it align for you as to what we collectively care about or what you care about? And so you can have people say, oh, this is what I think we should do, or, oh, I can see how this benefits me, or I can see how it's an extension of what I already believe. People are then using the pre-existing wiring and just adding a little extra to it, right? They're sort of building a branch off of a main trunk, right? They're not necessarily having to put in a whole new trunk. And what you don't want to do is say, you should change for me. I'm making you change, because they'll end up being resistant to you. And this is a little bit of a funny analogy, but think about it like an immune system, right? Ideally, an immune system works so that it identifies what's foreign and it fights it off, right? And I'll probably wrap up here in a minute or two. But the immune system fights off, right, that external, that threat. The ideas, but by the way, if something's native to your body, ideally it doesn't fight it off unless you have an autoimmune disorder, right? But generally speaking, whatever's foreign gets fought off. The same thing happens with a psychological immune system, a mental immune system. If the idea is coming from out there, I have to fight it off because it's not my idea. But if you can help me see how it benefits me, and I can arrive at that idea, right? This is one of the practices in coaching and executive coaching. If you can help align people's values and see how, and they discovered the aha for themselves, then it's native to them and they don't have to fight it off. They should fight off your idea in some ways, because otherwise they are becoming you. You can help them see how it benefits them, and you can allow the idea to become native to their own systems. Their psychological immune systems won't fight it off, right? It's just a different way to think about it. So hopefully that's helpful. These are all great questions. And somebody said you're a Blackhawks fan. Yeah, sorry about that. But you can understand that analogy. What do you see in the future for Latino leaders? I really appreciate that question, and I want to say I want to acknowledge being a middle-aged white guy from the outside, but getting to work, getting the absolute privilege to work with many Latino leaders and Latinx leaders. I would say that there is a groundswell of momentum that you all have, especially in bonding with each other in places like this with Prospanica, with one another in all of the different contexts of your life. And yet we also have to make sure to bridge outside of that, because there is a society that wants more, if the phrase is egalitarianism or the phrase is empowerment or what have you, there is momentum right now. And I would say that to capture that momentum, and yes, there are headwinds, absolutely, but there's a change in the landscape and people are starting to emerge and push. And the people who have pushed already, we're getting the benefit of them having broken through, and we have many of those examples right already in our community. But, and I hope you don't mind me saying our community, but I'm passionate about this community, and so I think about it that way. So Latino and Latinx leaders are emerging and will continue to emerge. And now is the time that it feels like society is more inviting, right? There are initiatives where they're saying we need more representation on boards and around the executive conference table, right, at senior leadership. But senior leaders, like you as a leader, have to prepare yourself, right? You have to do what it takes. And so it will take a little extra push right now, right? It will take a little bit of extra commitment right now for you to say, in order to capture the tailwinds or the emerging lessening of the headwinds, for you to emerge. But the world is really, if you look at even the media, not the media as in like the news, but like what we're consuming from a movie perspective, there's a lot more diversity in what we're consuming from movies and TV shows, et cetera. There's momentum. And so I would say dig deep and figure out, is this your time? Right? Is this my time to add more fuel? Or am I going to sit on those old beliefs, just sort of wrapping into what we talked about today? Am I going to sit in the cognitive superhighways that have said that I can't, right? Or am I going to challenge those? And am I going to need reinforcement? Absolutely, right? But am I going to challenge those so that I can, my software, that idea of believing in a new version of myself can actually rewire my brain, can rewire then how I show up in the world, can rewire how the world interacts with me, right? But you can only, sounds funny, but you can only do your inner work. And I would say the inner work as well as then your external expressions, your actions. But that inner work, especially around the brain, challenge the beliefs that have been sitting there that says that you can't. And while I would say this to any group that I would be a part of, I also am a firm believer in this particular context, because society has told you that you can do certain things and you can't because of a bunch of bullshit reasons. And sorry, Evan, bunch of reasons that aren't true, right? Have told you who you can be and who you can't be. Challenge those in order to rearrange and configure your brain to be the most powerful version of yourself, right? So that you can have those thoughts, those ideas, those experiences be wired together in a way that truly empowers not only you, but those you lead and society at large. So from my perspective, this is the time. And I realize that we are well over time, 20 minutes over time. And so I want to say an absolute thank you to all of you for attending, for staying. I want to say thank you to Prospanica for all of the work in bringing this together, especially at the last minute, as well as the commitment that you have to this community. And so it is an absolute honor to be a part of it. If you choose that you want to continue the journey, I'm happy to work with you as we go forward. So, Evan.
Wonderful, David. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And all of us here in the studio are going to give you a round of applause.
Thanks.
And to everyone who has been watching, thank you so much for your time, your enthusiasm, your flexibility, for being able to join us at such short notice, and for this, our first virtual summit. I do want to make one more plug for the Board Leadership Program. The questions that have come through are very much at the heart of what that program is designed to deal with and to confront. And it also does so, though, with the perspective of governance, as far as leading nonprofit organizations or for-profit organizations. So do check out prospanica.org/board leadership, learn more about it, and get your applications in as soon as possible. You'll get to spend a lot of time with David Morelli, as well as some other amazing faculty at the University of Denver Daniels College of Business. Thank you again to David, to all of you, and we hope to see you in person as soon as we can at the next Prospanica event. Have a great rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.